Welcome to the Hospo Hacks podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of industry leaders, innovators, and influencers shaping the future of business, tech, and culture. Each episode, we sit down with game changers, disruptors, and visionaries to uncover their journeys, insights, and the lessons they've learnt along the way. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a creative, or just someone hungry for inspiration, this podcast is for you. So sit back, tune in, and get ready to learn from the best. This next guest has one of the most challenging jobs in the hospitality industry, balancing the needs of his members against a tight regulatory environment, and from an outsider's perspective, handles it with grace and elegance. Let's have a big Hospo Hacks welcome to Sean Morrissey from the Australian Hotels Association. Welcome, Sean.
G'day, John. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Our pleasure. We are trying to do this podcast to bring in the industry heavyweights, and so welcome to the show. And with your reach of working for the AHA, and your title says it all. It's Deputy CEO and Chief Legal Counsel. So you've got pretty big shoes to fill there. Give us a little bit of background about what you do.
Yeah, thanks, John. I've been with the AHA for about 13 years now, lawyer by trade, and started in the AHA's Legal and Industrial Relations Department, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit about more today in the context of that important theme of compliance that we've discussed previously. But we represent, across New South Wales, about 2,000 members, predominantly hotel, pub-style hotels, about 1,600, about 400 accommodation hotels, 3, 4, 5-star accommodation hotels. It's a national organisation, a federated organisation. We have branches in every state and territory. And we provide a range of services, as I said, predominantly in that legal and IR space, but advocating for members' interests, looking to ensure that their needs are met in terms of media, communications, networking, and across the board ensuring that we can build and maintain a prosperous and thriving hospitality industry for our members.
Well, I think there's been a few challenges over the last few years, really, with COVID and all the rest of it and regulations, and we'll go into that deeper. But let's dive into you personally, Sean, and you mentioned this over a lunch we had where we, got to know each other pretty well. How would you, describe how it feels to do a legal, to become a lawyer and to do a degree? But then again, you're from Lithgow, is that right?
That's right, born and bred.
And at the same time, I think, did you do your law degree with your dad?
Yeah, that's right. I started studying law in the late 1990s. At the time, my father was a principal of the local Catholic high school in Lithgow, and he felt I think a missed calling in life, and thankfully I was studying at a good correspondence university in UNE, and my father decided it was time in his the ripe age of his mid-60s to join me in studying law. So we did that together, and about 10 years ago, my father, doing about one subject a semester, finally completed his law degree, did his College of Law, and after retiring from the education sector, did a stint as a young law graduate here at a law firm in Sydney. So never too old to learn.
No, you can teach a dog, an old dog new tricks, Sean, and that just shows a bit of resilience in the family. And obviously you've been with the AHA, you said, for 12 years, did you say?
Yeah, 12, 13 years, yeah.
Yeah, right. So, mate, so did you help your old man with his placement initially there?
I did. I shopped him around to a few law firms in town, and we were fortunate enough to find somebody who indicated they were after a young whippersnapper to get on board. So it was a very good experience.
And how's he going now? Is he still practising? Is he off to greener pastures?
He still does a bit of work in the prison sector these days, in an ombudsman type role as an official visitor to prison. So he's still utilising his legal expertise and skills there for a greater social cause.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. That's great. No, I love hearing those stories. That's a real one that's out of the bag, and I was really impressed with that because it is hard to do things as you get older, and like to do it when you're in your 60s, and for what reason? It's a pretty big big accomplishment, really. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, very
and to do it with
impressive.
your dad, you know, to do anything with your, whether it's your offspring or your dad, it must feel good, to be honest.
It was a good thing they didn't have that software that could cross-reference plagiarism and assessments back in the day, because I think there was some close collaboration on a few assignments that were submitted.
Well, as long as they can't take his degree off him, that's the main
I
thing.
think we're outside the statute of limitations.
That's good. So back to the serious business of advocating for members. You know, so Hospo the last few years, particularly, you know, the AHA and the pubs that they represent, you know, have had a few, you know, from COVID to regulatory compliance, you know, some massive hurdles there. And you know, what have you seen as the biggest issues that have, you know, let's put COVID at the back burner for now, because that's basically over. But, you know, moving forward, what are the biggest hurdles for your members, which are obviously hotel owners and managers and stuff, but you're advocating on their behalf. So what are the major complaints and compliance issues that they come to you with?
Yeah, it's you're right. Let's not go back and dwell on the trauma of COVID. Needless to say, though, it's been a slow burn out of that, and I think you know, global economic circumstances, excuse me, off the back of COVID, and local economic circumstances have made business tough for everybody. We've seen a very tight labour market over the last few years, easing slightly, but still a significant challenge for hotels to find particularly skilled labour, cooks and chefs, particularly in rural and regional and remote areas. Finding that semi-skilled and skilled labour to carry out those roles is very difficult. So the labour and the skills shortages has been challenging. It's operating a hotel is a very highly regulated environment that you're operating in not only in the human resources, the industrial relations space, which is an absolute nightmare at times to try and navigate, award compliance, wage rates and so forth, but also in that regulatory compliance space as it relates to your liquor and gaming authorities, ensuring that you're compliant with your relevant laws and regulations there. So whether it's Safe Work, whether it's the Fair Work Ombudsman, whether it's a liquor and gaming inspector, whether it's the local police, you can generally expect on any given week to have a visit from one or a number of them to ensure that you're doing what you need to do in that regard. And that's something that we really focus on from an AHA perspective in terms of servicing our members, to ensure that they're as equipped as they can possibly be, and have all the tools and the resources at their ready to be proactive, to be in front of that, to ensure that they're compliant. And we receive very great, overwhelmingly positive feedback from a number of those regulators, from all of those regulators, when compared with other industries or other sectors of the industry, that illustrate that our members are, broadly speaking, at the top end of the compliance spectrum, and that's something that I think we can all be very proud of.
And I think that's got a lot to do with, you know, the regulatory bodies making sure that, you know, that everybody, the bouncers are all licensed, right? That lockout laws are being complied with. You know, as much as it's been a pain in the bum for the people you advocate for, it has cleaned up the industry. Do you agree?
Oh, yes and no, to an extent. I think it's probably best described as a partnership between industry operators, the industry, government, community. I mean, you have an important social license when you're operating a hotel.
Yep.
That's something that all hoteliers acknowledge. I think it's fair to say, and that we as an industry acknowledge. You do sell a highly regulated licensed product, and with that comes significant responsibilities. You talk about the days of, days gone by. Yes, there was a time when social norms were a lot different. and when
Community
community expectations were a lot different, and people piling out of the boozer at your 6 o'clock swill, that sort of thing. That was a very different time. One of the things that I think our industry has been particularly good at has been self-regulating and has been evolving in line with those changing community expectations. I mean, I think back to the days of growing up before I was allowed in a pub, but it was a men-only environment.
Yeah.
You used to pull up out the side of the hotel at 6:30 on a Friday night, stick your head into the to the bar and call Dad out and grab your fish and chips, and you wouldn't see a woman in there. And that's changed now, and I think a testament to the success of the industry is that we've evolved into these family-friendly, food and beverage diverse offerings, while still remaining affordable and accessible to everybody. That's an important part of it, and that's something as well that I think is really tied into a lot of the advocacy work we've done around the price of beer and the price of alcohol. We're very pleased topically with the announcement that the federal government made just last week to freeze the excise on draft beer for a couple of years. There's a lot of, leaving aside what we know personally and anecdotally around going down to the local and enjoying a drink with your friends, there's a lot of academic study out there that suggests that it really is good for you and it's really good for the community. Without getting too deep back into my days of studying sociology at university, there are a number of studies that talk about the social licence attached to operating a hotel is very important, and our members and hotel operators recognise and appreciate that. And I think it's fair to say that in doing so, they've taken a very proactive approach to self-regulating.
Yep.
And ensuring that they've been able to evolve with those changing community expectations. I think it's fair to say that they're a very safe environment to be in, licensed premises. I mean, the evolving nature of those, and I think this is a real testament to the success, has been the industry, the hotel industry in particular, its ability to adapt in that way and create these family-friendly environments. You look at beer gardens these days in terms of the offerings they have there, children's playgrounds.
It's crazy,
and play
exactly.
areas. But on one side you can still have somewhere we can go and have a beer and a bet, and on the other side, you can take your family and you can have a nice lunch, a romantic dinner, but also a Saturday afternoon with your mates and a beer and a bet. And
I think a lot of these places now, like a lot of people do. And if you look at the numbers on drinking, young kids aren't drinking like they used to, and that's another challenge we'll talk about later. But they are going to restaurants. They are going to better. If you've got a good counter lunch or you've got a good restaurant within the pub, it does attract people. It's not just alcohol that people are going there to drink. It's the venue, and as you said, the family. Like I remember when I had my kids, I used to take them down the pub because they could play on the slippery slide, and I could have a beer.
Yep.
I mean, really, and that just got me through the day half the time.
Yep. Again, it's that diversity of offering, but the culinary piece has become particularly important, and also I think having it at an accessible price point, I think is important as well. You can take the kids along, and you can engage at various levels. There's a lot of there's quite a bit of academic research out there that really lends support to the importance of the local pub as a community hub, and having that accessibility is really a big part of it. There's an American sociologist by the name of Ray Oldenburg, and he wrote about this concept of, which I found quite interesting, of a third place. He said you've got three places. He said you've got your first place, which is home.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your second place, which is work. And you've got this third place. And that's where, when you're not at work, you're not at home. For some people, it's going to the park. For some people, it's going to the cafe. For some people, it's going to a restaurant. But for a lot of people, that third place is the local pub. It's got to be accessible. You've got to be able to get there without having to jump in a car or spending too much time on public transport. And it's a real great leveler in that regard. I think, you know, whether you're a doctor or a dentist or the local garbo, or whoever it might be, the moment you walk into the pub, and I always think back to that great American sitcom Cheers, you know, where everybody knows your name, without getting too cheesy. It's really like that.
No, 100%. And I think one of the biggest catchphrases in politics today is the pub test.
That's it.
Does it pass the pub test? You know, and if you're, you know, and we all know what that means. You know, you're sitting in the pub, you're talking to the doctor, the lawyer, and you're a garbo. You know, does it strike a chord with the common man and the general public? You know, and I think, and that's a good, you know, analogy for Australian thought and that third, and dovetailing back to what you said about the third place. One thing that strikes me a real chord with me with the third space is that, you know, whether your work life's not happy or your home life's not happy, you choose your third space. That is the crux of the third space, right?
Yes.
It's not something you have to, family most of the time, you have to be there. Work, you have to be there, but you choose your third space. And to what you're saying, you know, people are choosing the pub as their third space. And whether it be there to go and have a punt, to go and play the pokies, or to bring the kids, or, you know, or go and have a celebration of your anniversary or whatever it be, you know, that's where the offering of the pub or the hotel, you know, has really branched out, you know, and a lot of them are really smart. Like, you know, we were down at the Watsons Bay Hotel on the weekend, and they've got accommodation there. Then they've got this part of the bar. There's an upper deck. There's a lower deck. It's actually got demographics built into the whole pub. And then there's a front section where the punters are. You know, it's been pretty well thought out. And I think that's the level of, you know, pragmatism and thought that goes into these venues now. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think, again, that adaptability and that evolution of that diverse offering in pubs is something that is really allowing us to stand apart and to grow across the industry. And it's something that I think is no small part that resilience piece that we spoke about a lot, again, not wanting to talk about COVID, but, you know, we were the first ones to shut. We were the last ones to open. We had a lot of conditions and restrictions placed upon us, and it was traumatic for everybody. But that adaptability and that diversity of offering, I think, was something that played a very central role to our ability to come back very strongly from that challenging period.
Oh, 100%. And like, going back to what you said about, you know, that hub where people go and scientific, you know, publications showing that it's such an important part of humanity, I think that was evident in COVID. Like, you know, how bad was it being on your own? You know, and only, you know, you only stayed with who you live with in your household. And again, there's your third space is gone, obviously, you know. So, you know, I think that is it. I think COVID really brought that, or did bring it out for me, you know. Just, I didn't realise how social humans are. Like, it just really, how much I needed it personally, you know, how much I miss going down and having a beer with the boys or the local pub, or, you know, you just don't realise the effect it has on you.
It does, and it's important from so many different respects. I mean, people often think that you think of the quintessential bush pub, right? You know, that's, you know, often the place where the table of knowledge gathers, and I think it's worth calling out. I mean, for men's mental health, particularly, you know, for lonely blokes in the bush, that's an important place for them to come together. And again, that third place, but also, you know, somebody who lived in both the country, but also in inner city Sydney, and, you know, in a small apartment, raising a young family. The local pub becomes your lounge room.
Yeah.
Becomes a place where you get that physical space that you need that you don't have at home. So it certainly, you know, as I said, ticks those boxes across the board in all regions. No,
100%. And one thing that, you know, again, I've noticed, and it's all anecdotal, obviously, and obviously I do go to the pub a fair bit, so I'm shelfing myself, but one thing I've noticed, and this must have a lot to do with the revenue of pubs and how you're meant to attract people, you know, because there's a pub on every corner in some suburbs, right? How do you get market share? And there's obviously those things going on. But, mate, if you're updating your venue every 5 to 10 years, you're going to be left behind, right? And these fit-outs are not cheap. let's be honest, right? So if you want to attract the best, the younger crowd, the up and comings, the social influencers, all the people that you want to get to your pub, and that's how it drives revenue. You got to invest some heavy cash, right? Do you see, has that been an issue? Like imagine having a pub and then you got to go borrow against the pub, and the return on investment, it must be there, or they wouldn't be doing it. But is that an issue for publicans? When they buy a pub, or they've got to put serious cash into a pub these days. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of skin in the game, and I don't profess to be one of those. I'm the lawyer that advises them and keeps them out of trouble, and admire them for their business acumen. But probably the best anecdote I can give you there as an example was, again, harping back to COVID. When we did shut down, I and a lot of other people probably just assumed that, I think as the Prime Minister at the time sort of talked about, people going under their doonas for a few months. And we thought it was just shut down, put the keys away, and wait until we could go back 3, 6, however many months later.
Yep.
Within 2 or 3 days, our guys were in those venues, and we did a lot of work to ensure with JobKeeper and those wage subsidy and support schemes behind the scenes to ensure that these sort of things could happen and keep those employees engaged. But we had venues out there that were getting straight into renovations. They had their staff there doing, things as simple as painting the walls and polishing floors and whatever it is. So it's a constant, again, evolution of the venue and looking to keep it refreshed and new. That does come with quite a bit of risk, but hopefully a lot of reward as well.
Yeah. And, this is particularly, and I don't understand the business. I suspect I do. But like a lot of these pubs, let's look at some of the sale prices of some of these pubs that have been selling for the last few years. I don't like it's a good investment if you can manage it well, right? So, if you can buy the right pub in the right area in the growth area, it's a really smart, astute investment. And this is where I can see so many pub groups are growing, and some are investment groups now and all that sort of thing. It is a lucrative business, and it's a tough business. Do you see? And I haven't seen many. Are they? What sort of pubs are the ones that are not surviving or not thriving? Are they just not managed well? How do you see that?
I think you've seen probably particularly over the last 20 or 30 years, you've seen a bit of a consolidation of hotels and the hotel market in regional New South Wales. Speaking from a New South Wales perspective, and probably the best example I can give there is, you go to a small town of 2,000 or 3,000 people, and 30 years ago, and you go, geez, there's 10, 12 pubs here. How does that survive? How does that maintain itself? And again, with changing community trends and engagements and so forth, a 10 pub town was never going to be always sustainable as a 10 pub town. It becomes a 5 pub town. A 5 pub town becomes a 3 pub town. One thing that I think is critically important, though, is that a 2 pub or a 1 pub town never becomes a no pub town, because once you lose your pub, generally the town's gone. Your pub and your post office are usually the last 2 things to go. So there has been that consolidation, but that's had its pros and its cons. Those 10 pubs turning into 5 pubs, those 5 pubs have been able to reinvest in a way that probably the other ones weren't sustainable, weren't able to do.
But from my research into this is, back in the day, a pub was run by a brand of beer, right? So like it was a Resch's pub and
Tooths.
Yeah. And exactly. So, and obviously I think if you like Tooths, you drank in that pub, and if you liked, and is that really what happened? And obviously, you had one on every corner then. A few died, but there's still obviously the 2 or 3 pubs that are remaining, right?
Yes, there was up until a lot of publicans and historians would would correct me on this, but probably up until 40 or 50 years ago, a lot of hotels were predominantly owned by the breweries
Right.
and effectively leased out to operators to run.
Yeah, right.
Until they were, until that practice was dissolved. But there is still, as you said, there's large group operators that are operating hotels, and they do that in a very sophisticated and professional manner. And it's that rising tide raises all the boats. Those very well-established group operators have, I think, gone a long way to lifting the overall standard of the hotel offering. One thing that I see and constantly amazes me at AHA functions and social gatherings is you often forget that they're all in competition with one another, and they're sitting around the bar having a drink,
laugh,
having a laugh. But not only that, they're sharing their success stories, and they're sharing what makes their business successful, and what makes their business work. And they're very open and transparent about that. And I think that's, again, one of the great benefits I see in that network of the AHA and its members in terms of that willingness to share and to learn from one another, all the while maintaining some pretty healthy competition.
And just with competition, I go into some bars and you're trying to get a type of beer, right? They don't have it. And then other bars, they've got... So how does that work? Do the different types of... Now it's gone the other way where the brewers or the distributors are trying to get deals to have the taps. Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's and that's been, again, a pretty long-standing practice. I mean, you've got your two major brewery suppliers there in Lion and CUB.
Yep.
And they run around and they chase the business. And again, it's a healthy competition between the two of them. There's a lot of good up-and-coming and well-established independent brewers out there as well. So you'll generally
So are
have
they competing with, Stone and Wood, for example, used to come in the market. It was a craft beer at the time. It came in and people started to like it, and then it'd pop up in trendy bars, and then sort of slowly became sort of mainstream. I think Lion took it over recently or something like that. Now that's, so there is space for these independent brewers to come up and compete still?
There has to be.
Yeah.
And again, one of the key things that we always advocate for is healthy competition across the industry, whether that's brewery suppliers, whether that's wagering suppliers to the industry, whether that's subscription TV services. It's always important that you have some sort of healthy competition.
And do you advocate on their behalf for some of those deals as well? Like, do you have anything to do with the brewery deals and advocate on or is that something that they just go direct to market over?
Generally, those negotiations take place at a venue to supplier level.
Right.
There are broader industry issues like the excise that we spoke about, where we will advocate in partnership, with the brewers, with the spirits providers,
because it helps them. If it's cheaper to sell in the pubs, it makes
right.
it cheaper. So and you guys, you're and I don't know if I made this clear earlier. You're working on behalf of the AHA New South Wales, and you've got branches in every major city, capital city around Australia. And you have a lobby group in Canberra doing stuff on behalf of you guys on a federal level. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have a national office, which is based out of Canberra. A lot of the vast majority of our regulatory framework exists at a state by state level. So we're very state heavily focused. So each of the state branches, there are a number of Commonwealth issues such as excise. Which need to be advocated for.
Well, because most licensing, licensing is a state issue, right? So if you're dealing, it's no good having a national body dealing with state issues when all the regulatory issues are through a state body, right? So it makes a lot of sense to have a state-based AHA, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, and then for the main federal stuff like tax and maybe work health and safety and stuff that's done at a federal level, right? That's where, like Ferg, who's a good mate of ours as well, advocates on your members' behalf, correct?
That's correct, yeah. And Stephen Ferguson does a fantastic job down in Canberra. You can't get from one end of Parliament House to the other with Ferg without getting pulled up 13 times. I met the Ukrainian ambassador who was on a first name basis with him when I was down there not all that long ago. But again,
I hope Donald Trump doesn't listen to this podcast. He might put you on the hit list.
I think we might be safe there. I think we might be safe there for now, John.
Yeah.
But there is an important interaction and overlap. The AHA meets as a national executive on a very regular basis, where each of the state presidents and CEOs come together to discuss alignment of policy positions and issues. But again, a lot of the stuff is dealt with at a state level, and that's why we resource that accordingly.
And you have a legal branch that's pretty joined at the hip with the state branch, the New South Wales branch. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we do. About 8 years ago, we established an incorporated legal practice, which is wholly owned and operated by the AHA in New South Wales. And that was the brainchild many years ago of our long-serving president, Scott Leach, who's himself a solicitor by trade.
I bet he didn't do it with his dad.
I don't believe that he did. That's a bit of a rare one.
Yeah.
But Scott had this vision of a legal practice that was an add-on benefit, a value add, and that's something that's always drives Scott, and which he feeds through to the AHA to ensure that we're always providing that value proposition to our members, and that's got to be ever evolving. But the legal practice was set up. My former colleague Philip Ryan, who's now Commissioner Ryan of the Fair Work Commission, he and I worked to set up that practice in about 2017, and that's in its 8th year now. It was set up as Hospitality Legal. We've now rebranded that to HTA Legal. It operates a little bit more broadly.
HTA meaning?
HTA, Hospitality, Tourism and Accommodation.
Right.
So we provide that service to members at effectively a heavily subsidised rate. Two key practice areas. One is industrial relations, as we've discussed. The other one is in that general licensing compliance space. And we're slowly growing and evolving to provide what will ultimately be a full service suite of legal service offerings to members, as I said, at a fairly heavily subsidised rate as a member benefit. And that's something very unique that we're very proud of being able to provide to members.
And what sort of compliance do you think should be advocated for your members in regards? Is it training, education, obviously, reviews, auditing, because coming out of school, kids don't learn these skills. They go get a bar job. How do we ensure that your members are protected by ensuring that the kids coming out of school without these skills know what the wrong and right things to do?
Having a very strong and robust policy and procedure framework, a training framework, contracts of employment, that whole employment life cycle tied up in that tight framework is of critical importance, and that's something again that we look to provide those resources to our members to have available to them. Having that framework in place is the best and most important step that you can take to creating a workplace which is safe, is free from harassment, free from psychosocial risks, physical risks, slip and fall hazards, work health and safety audits, whatever it might be. We look to provide members with a full suite of offerings and services there. And I know SaucedIt, for example, and we've been doing a bit of work with you guys on that. I think is really going to complement that in terms of providing a means to automate the process and to take a bit of the manual labour out of it and to take a bit of the human error out of it as well. I think even with the best of intent, I still see sophisticated, experienced operators slipping up in that very difficult compliance framework and that compliance space that they need to operate in.
There is a real issue for operators these days with, the psychosocial hazards now. If you read the list, it's extensive and exhaustive, really. And, we're talking about post-traumatic. We're talking about things that can come back to haunt you in 10 years. It's such a minefield, and it really hasn't been properly tested either. So let's be honest about that. But I think, if you give your employees the resources, and look, to be honest with you, an orientation doc, and a couple of questions can be enough, just to show you've got you've shown the due diligence of informing these newbies that have just rocked up for their first job.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that we've been heavily focused on in terms of building our resources, and those are the discussions that we've been having in terms of platforms such as SaucedIt to give some automation to that process and to take some of that manual handling out of it. As I've said, it's important to have. It's important to think of this in terms of that whole employment life cycle. It's that onboarding process. It's ensuring that those staff are given the tools and the resources and the training at the outset of their employment. That's important from creating a safe working environment primarily, but it's also important too from a perspective of protecting yourself as a business operator. So if you are faced with a claim, involving some sort of psychosocial claim or harassment claim in the workplace, you need to establish that you've taken reasonable steps to mitigate against that risk, and that's a valid defence against that. You can't always control everything that's going to happen in your workplace, but you're expected by law, you're required by law, principally work health and safety laws, to take steps to mitigate the risk of that. And that's again where that paper trail becomes very important.
Exactly.
Because you might do this, but you might not document it. You might go through a process of, for example, a disciplinary process involving an employee, and you might not document that meeting. You might not make that file note. So systems such as yours, I think, are a really valuable tool to ensure that you do that, because, as I've said, even the most sophisticated and some of the less sophisticated operators will often slip up. I remember a bloke. Let's call him. We'll just call him Bluey, who's my fictitious but not fictitious hotelier. But Bluey came in to see me one day, and he said, "Look, I've got this unfair dismissal claim that I've received from an employee, and I sacked him a couple of weeks ago." I said, "Okay, we'll have a look at it." I said, "So talk me through it." And he said, "Look, it's all good. He was turning up late to work. He was being rude to customers." He said, "I gave him 3 warnings, and then I terminated him." I thought, okay. I said, "Were they given in writing?" He goes, yeah, I've got them here. And he pulled out his folder. I thought, okay, I think we're going to be all right here. I was pleasantly surprised. And I said, "Okay, so talk me through it." He said, "Okay, well, I sat him down." He said, I said, "Look, we've had some issues with your employment. You're turning up late. You're being rude to customers." He said, so he pulls out 4 letters. And he said, so I handed over his first warning and said, "There's your first warning." He said, "Then I handed over his second warning." I said, "There's your second warning." Handed over the third one. "There's your third warning. And there's your termination letter." So I said, the intention was great,
Well,
Blue,
none of
but
them were signed.
No, he just handed them the 3 warning letters and the termination letter all at the same time. So his intention was great, but the procedure
All at the same time.
all at the same time.
Yeah, right.
So we had a bit of a problem, as you can see. So some of the details in that procedure often get lost in the mix.
Well, unfair dismissal is probably where I was going to go next. So that would be the next. I don't know if unfair dismissal or harassment are the 2 biggest cases you deal with, but unfair dismissals are one as well. That in regards to if you've got less, I think it's more than 15 staff, you're under the unfair dismissal laws, right?
Less than 15.
Less than 15
makes you a small business employer, which doesn't completely exclude you from liabilities around termination of employment, but it does lessen the chances. Yeah.
And without putting you on show, if you you hire casual staff, and they're rude to customers and they're casual. You just, as far as I know, you don't have to pick them up the next shift, right?
There's often a misconception around casual employees, and what's a true casual and what's called a casual who's employed on a regular and systematic basis. And my rule of thumb and my starting position that I always advise members is to assume that a casual employee is a regular and systematic casual employee, and for that reason should be treated
As a full-time.
from the perspective of ensuring that procedural fairness and due process if you're managing disciplinary issues.
Yep.
In most cases, you should be looking upon them no differently than if they were a permanent employee. And the reason I say that is that courts and tribunals and the Fair Work Act, which regulates these types of claims and these types of actions, will, for the most part, look at them and treat those matters and assess those matters as if they were, for all intents and purposes, full-time or permanent employees.
Because this has been a recent change in the legislation in regards to what a full-time person is, because historically people were getting hired on the same pattern of employment, which means if you're working every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then, whatever, if you've got a regular pattern, you could be a permanent part-time, you could be, is that right? Is that sort of how the law is sort of being, determined, I suppose, or interpreted is probably the word?
Yeah, there were some changes under amendments to the Fair Work Act recently, dealing with casual, regular and systematic casual employees, and also contract workers and the like. There were some business groups who were not happy with those changes. Stephen Ferguson, who we spoke about before, worked very hard engaging with the government when those changes were brought about to ensure that somebody who worked with no firm advance commitment to their employment, or somebody who worked regular and systematic hours, could still be treated as a casual employee without penalty in our industry, and we were satisfied with the.
On the employer's side, which obviously you're advocating for the employer, it still doesn't seem fair that you can cop your 25% loading and still be determined as a full timer. Like, it just isn't that sort of the payoff or the thing that why you're getting 25% extra.
You're right. There shouldn't ever be a case where what we call double dipping occurs. If you're paid as a casual, you're paid that 25% loading, and that 25% loading is deemed to compensate you for those other entitlements. But if you're,
but then you're, come to unfair dismissal, you're treated like a full timer. It doesn't sort of make sense in the fact that the double dip might not be in the pay, as in you're not getting the entitlements, but you're getting treated that in an unfair dismissal law type scenario.
Yeah, that's correct. And where somebody is deemed to be, as I said, that regular and systematic type of casual employee, they will attract those various protections that other employees receive. So
they're not getting the entitlement. They're not getting the long serve. They still get long service, don't they?
Correct.
But they don't get the holidays
annual leave, sick
days. Right. Okay. So they do get, where they're missing out is the obviously where they are double dipping is that sort of ability to the protection in regards of unfair dismissal if they are doing those regular pattern of employment, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Okay. And as cases go, what would be the main cases that you are advocating on behalf in legal sense? Like, a lot of these things are settled out of court, correct?
Yeah, the vast majority of matters that come across our desk tend to be unfair dismissal matters, general protections, what are called general protections or adverse action type claims.
Can you explain what that is?
So, an adverse action claim is a claim that's brought under the Fair Work Act, which is where somebody, in simple terms, has what's referred to as a workplace right, and the employer either discriminates or takes what's called adverse action against them on the basis of a workplace right. So what does that mean in simple terms? As an example, an employee might make a complaint and say that I'm being bullied by my manager. And that employer is then pulled into the boss's office and, for whatever reason, has their employment terminated. They're entitled to bring an adverse action claim and say, well, I was exercising a workplace right. That workplace right is to make a complaint. And in response to making that complaint, exercising that workplace right, you have taken adverse action against me, being terminated my employment. It doesn't necessarily need to be termination of your employment. It refers to in the legislation, I think, as injuring a person or injuring a person in the course of their employment. So that can be disciplining them, issuing them with any sort of disciplinary procedure, demoting them, docking
Changing
their
their
pay,
roster.
changing their roster, whatever it might be. So it has a very, very broad reach.
Yeah,
and importantly, whilst there's a qualifying period for employees to bring an unfair dismissal claim, which is usually 6 or 12 months, depending on whether you're a small business or not, anyone can bring a general protections or an adverse action claim from day dot. So we do often see employees who are terminated within their probation period using that adverse action claim as a tool to get their foot in the door to bring a claim and try and get some settlement money out of their employer.
So generally, is it 3 to 6 months the probationary period?
Yeah, there's a difference between what's called the probation period in a contract, which you may set at 3 months or at 6 months, and what's called the minimum employment period. And the minimum employment period, that's the relevant period for the purposes of whether someone can bring an unfair dismissal claim. So
And how long is that?
that's 6 months if you've got 15 or more employees. That's a period of 6 months.
So
Or
legally, you have to set it at 6 months if you can put a probate. You can put a 3 month and try and get away with it as an employer, right? Legally, it's 6 months.
It's 6 months in the context of the period during which an employer can't bring a claim. So you might set a probation period in a contract at 3 months and say, we'll conduct a review at 3 months. But you've usually got that extra 3 months up your sleeve, or up to 9 months beyond that if you're a small business employer.
Yeah, right.
To review the person's employment and potentially terminate them without them having access or recourse to an unfair dismissal claim.
But they can bring an adverse action in that time.
They
regardless.
can, and they can bring a whole range of claims in that time. But I think the important lesson there, and it's a question that I'll always ask a member or a client, and our team will always ask them, if you're looking to terminate somebody within that initial period, you say, okay, well, no, they don't have an unfair dismissal claim available to them, but have they exercised any workplace rights? Are there any red flags to look for? Have they made a complaint? Have they put a workers' comp claim in? Those are the sort of things to be
Because if they put a
mindful of.
workers' comp claim in, then they could say I was put off because I was injured.
That's right.
You know, so
Now, you still need to prove a causal connection between the two. You need to still be able to establish that the person was terminated as a direct result of them exercising their workplace right. And that's often where the big dispute and the big grey area will lie. The employer will say, I had a workers' comp claim on foot. The employer will say, I sacked you because you stole money. It had nothing to do with the workers' compensation claim. And so then that's then left for a court or a tribunal to determine, based on the evidence, what was the motivating factor behind the termination.
But if Johnny's got the bar job and he's been rude to customers and we don't, and he's not going to fit in with the crew, for example, and I don't roster him on the next roster, can he bring an adverse action for that?
Conceivably, anybody can.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's a very,
right.
very open sort of...
Which is again, it goes back to the importance of documenting these things and documenting processes, because if you've got a contemporaneous record of even discussions that were had, often there'll be a chronology, and you'll generally be able to establish that what started the process preempted or predated the employee lodging a complaint. Because what you'll often see is the employee feels the heat on them. They then react and say, okay, I'm going to make you're bullying me. No, I'm just performance managing you. You need to have that paper trail there to show that you started the performance management process before the bullying complaint comes in. That goes a long way to ensuring that you're going to be ahead of the game if the employee brings some sort of claim against you.
Well, I must say, it is refreshing, Sean, to see someone who can network a room and who can shake hands and introduce people and advocate for people, but also knows the law by the back of his hand. So well done to you. But I'm going to put you on the spot to wrap this whole session up. And I'm sure, Australia-wide or even New South Wales-wide, you've tried and tested a few watering holes yourself. And I want to know your top 5 pubs.
Okay.
What do you got for me?
Normally I can get away with this, and I can tell Arthur Laundy that one of his pubs is my favourite pub when I'm talking to him, or Bruce Solomon.
Oh, you're just trying to stay sweet with the big boys. Is that right?
But depending on who you talk to, but you have got me on the spot here. I'd have to say that my favourite pub, which happens to now be my local, in fact, I think we shared a beer over there recently, would be the Bald Rock Hotel.
Oh, yeah, we did, yeah.
Over at Roselle, Balmain.
And they've done that up and they've thrown a bit of cash into that, and that's a lot better than it used to be, isn't it?
Has arguably, and again, I'll be careful here, arguably the best, one of the best Guinnesses on tap there at the pub. I love the Lord Dudley over in Paddington.
Yes.
Iconic venue.
Classic.
And an example of where common sense prevails, and you can still stand out in the street and have a schooner in the fresh air, and nobody seems to have lost an eye over it.
No, it is. It is a great, 2 great pubs. You've got 3 to go.
Couple of country favourites. I'd have to say the iconic Silverton Hotel, which is just out of Broken Hill. Peter and Patsy, who have been the hosts and the owners of that for many years, is a great venue, and one which has some excellent film memorabilia from Mad Max and I think Priscilla out there as well. The Almond Tree Pub, which also a frequent winner of the Bush Pub.
Almond Tree Pub.
Almond Tree.
Where's that? Is that
out near Gilgandra away.
Right.
Which is a great spot to visit. And you've left me with one more.
Anything on the coast? Any pub? What about the old? What's the one on the way down to Wollongong? That's a cracker. The one on the coastal road. There's a few actually down there.
I do know the one right on the cliff there. Which actually that would be. My wife frequently refers to that as her favourite pub, and I forgot the name of it. But yeah, there's something for everybody.
Yeah,
is probably my most diplomatic answer there. There's always something for everybody.
There is, and I think that like anything, perception depends on your mood as well. Sometimes you walk into a pub and it's, you're in a good mood and it's pumping and it just, there's a fireplace on and it's cold, and it's the perfect place for a glass of red and to sit in a big soft chair. And then other days you've been surfing all day and you come back and the cricket's on and you're drinking a schooner, and there's so much variance in the pub experience these days. And for me personally anyway, it just depends on how I am that day. Like I could gather Chloe and have a beer with, down there, or I could be up Newcastle way or anywhere down in Mollymook. It's amazing that you can get around and that third space is there for you, that the standards are high because they're kept high and they're advocated by guys like yourself. And, that everybody's getting paid right, and, that the beer's cold, because if it's not, you're not going to be there and there's going to be no one there. So, it's an amazing experience, and it's really, I'm really grateful that you could come in today, Sean. You brought a lot of knowledge, and, and you do represent your members really well, and I know you're very passionate about that, and also legally backing them up as well. So thanks again for coming in today, and we'd love to have you back in the future, and thanks for that. Really
Wonderful.
Appreciate it.
Been a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, mate.